Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. It's a frontline update for the 30th of January 2023. Always a quiet day for sources on a Monday. A lot of sources generally don't, like the Institute for the Study of War, which aggregates sources from both the Russians and Ukrainians, doesn't produce a detailed report on a Monday based on the site, or the Sunday night if you like, and I talk about it on the Monday. Lots of other sources, just generally Sunday, people are doing stuff and they don't want to be always reporting things, whereas I appear to be always reporting things. So Mondays are always a bit of a struggle to make sure I've got an accurate understanding of what's gone on the front line, but I have the sources I have, and it just might mean that Sundays are just a bit more, Mondays, I guess, are a bit more scant on detail than otherwise I and they would be. Okay, let's go straight. Well, actually, before we go to the Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna front line in the northeast, Kharkiv has been hit by an S-300 missile. That, as Michael McKay says, Russian terrorists fired a missile which hit an apartment building in Kharkiv. At least one person was killed. That was an elderly lady, and several others were injured. The footage is not great. It's just, yeah, it's an apartment building that's hit by an S-300 missile. S-300s are inaccurate when used in their secondary mode as a ground-to-ground missile rather than as a SAM, surface-to-air missile, that their primary function is. No surprise, Russia has a habit of hitting apartment buildings with missiles, and Kharkiv is no exception there. Okay, so let's now go to that front line, Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna. Here's my map. Not too much detail of anything going on sort of in the northern Kupiansk area. Repelled attacks around Kuzmivka, nothing unusual there. Kuzmivka, Novoselivska. I showed you a video of how much of an apocalyptic scene it is around here. The buildings destroyed and turned to rubble, but no real detail. As we come further down south, we approach the Makivka to Ploshchanka area and Chervonopopivka, with Terny, Yampolivka, and Zarichna behind here. Okay, what does Defmon have to say? Defmon says, Kreminna to Svatove, the Ukrainians repulse attacks in the area of Yampolivka, Dubrova, Bularivka, and Verkhonokamyanka. The Russians seem to be stepping up activity in the Kreminna area. Now, I reported in my news update that it appears that the Russians, or at least the General Staff, are saying the Russians have switched to an offensive mode in this area. So you're starting to see the Ukrainians, who were doing quite well south of Kreminna, being possibly pushed back, and certainly to the north, as we've seen over the last week or so. The grey area, as according to Defamon here, now stretches back pretty much to Turska and Zarichna and towards Yampil. And very close to Yampolivka. So the Russians are putting pressure westwards, and yeah, Ukrainians are under the cosh a little bit, attacking. Now you can see that Dubrova appears to be coming under the Russian sphere of influence again. That switches position on a routine basis. Let's have a look at Poulet-Volant's map, which is nice and clear. It shows that where the Russians are pressuring Chervonopopivka and up to Ploshchanka. Then we have towards the Torska, Yampolivka area, and then Dubrova, as mentioned, and Bilarivka as well, where Ukrainians have done fairly well in the Bilarivka area. Let's go to see what No Report says. In terms of focus, there seems to be a shift to the area north of Svatove. So now we're going much further north, where the Ukrainian has real momentum. No real detail about that though. So Kuzmivka, good signs there, but still too early to raise a flag. Preliminary information shows a follow-up on the gains eastward I reported yesterday. So he starts off by saying, up here in the Kuzmivka area, that things might be happening north of Kuzmivka in this area, but no real detail. Good news possibly in Kuzmivka itself. And then we come down and he goes on to talk about Kreminna. So his claims on Kreminna are. As for Kreminna, I have to admit that Russia until now managed to keep the Ukrainians away from the crucial part north and northeast of Dubrovka, and have even regained some ground. Despite dominant presence, the Ukrainians had not yet succeeded in forcing a breakthrough due to Russian reinforcements and counterattacks. So the Russians are reinforcing in the area, as I talked to you about previously. They are reinforcing with airborne, who are kind of more crack troops, I suppose, or certainly better troops than those that would have been there already, and that's providing a challenge for the Ukrainians. Rebar says very little, or says nothing basically about anywhere until you get to Solidar and Bakhmut, so that's interesting in and of itself. Andrew Perpetua was talking on a live stream last night, saying that in this area here, you have. So let's see if I can get. So he is claiming that there is artillery that is stationed basically around here, and that is able to hit. There's this road that you can see coming in there, and that is a very dangerous road to travel to supply Bilorivka, and that gets hit with artillery and heavy mortars from here, causing a problem. Also, Bilorivka itself, Serebianka is hit as well, and the forest itself. Um, so that is a problem for the Ukrainians. They also have artillery and whatnot up here that is also helping to do that. So that's a challenge. The Ukrainians have several places they can cross the river around there. Sorry, just to correct myself, it's this road that comes down here where they are parking their artillery and heavy mortars. So just in this area, uh, in the northern parts of the forest, and they are using this area to hammer Serebrianka and the road into Bilorivka. There, it's all about sort of where to cross. So they are thinking the Ukrainians are crossing the Seversky River here. At the Siversky Donets River at Serebianka, so they're hammering that. There's a crossing that's down here, Zarichna. There's a bridge apparently here that is hammered quite a lot by the Russians, and so that's very difficult to get stuff across there. So it's a case of, well, where do you cross the river? Is the river? I mean, Andrew Perpetua says that it's not that full at the moment, the river, due to sort of droughts, if you like. Although there have been rains over the last few months, but it's not as high as it possibly it should be, and so crossing it isn't as big of a problem as it might otherwise be. But there are places, I think, to cross in Serebianka, Orikhiv, and then further to the west here. So yeah, the Russians are giving the Ukrainians a really difficult time around there. It seems they've gone on the offensive and they are using their artillery fairly effectively. As Defmon continues here, the Russian attack around Dubrovka was probably done by a 76th GAAD, and it seems like Russian forces are using the VDV, so these are the airborne troops and naval infantry, so much better, more crack troops, I guess, more and more for offensive actions lately. So that kind of drives home what I was saying. Okay, as we come out of the Bilorivka area, go down south to Bakhmut. So we have Bakhmut here and the northern area of Solidar going on around to Vesely. Usual claims of all of these places being under a lot of pressure. Defmon says Bakhmut, the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Verkhnoko-Manyanska, which we've just gone past, Rozdilivka, Sil, Blahadatny, Paraskavivka, and Bakhmut. You Russians are making small gains, and they managed to capture Blahadatny this morning. Ukrainians most likely fell back to the fortified high ground west of Blahadatny. And no report says Russian forces took control of Blahadatna. Krasnopolivka, north of Solidar, also came under control of the Russian forces, which already had, actually. The intersection south of Paraskavivka is contested, and that's what I said yesterday. So Krasnohora is contested. That's interesting. So that is now well, I have it as contested anyway. Let's just put all this into the context already. So as you can see, I've not changed my Ukrainian lines because I wanted to show you where the Russians have really taken control, which is basically to the west of that road. So originally it was all about the railway line, and we're thinking that that was going to hold out as a kind of defensive position for some time, but the Russians were able to overcome that with relative ease, at least in terms of time. And they've now taken land to or at least they've taken control of this road, and the Ukrainians appear to be on the higher ground that sits behind there. And will almost certainly have entrenchments built in already. Blahadatne was this small settlement that was taken by the Russians yesterday. There'll be places like this that will offer a little bit of defensive capability, probably for the Ukrainians, but we shall see. I don't have exact detail about how much ground is taken here, so that could be under Russian control. Poulet-Volon has a map that shows the Russians actually quite far to the west of that road. So the white represents a road, and he has the Russians, pushing on quite a lot there. But I don't know for sure. I need to have that confirmed. Krasnohora, which I did have as a grey zone, now no reports are saying, yep, it's a grey zone. It's not controlled by either side. And this, so it seems like wrong map. It seems, according to no reports, that this junction here is now contested. So you've got the garden centre, you've got a tire place here. So here's the garden centre, you've got the tire shop there. So realistically, we have, I guess, the area for you basically got grey zone now stretching all the way back to there. I don't know about here so much. And it looks like, Krasnohora really is up for grabs at the moment, and that's where you've got a lot of pressure from the Russians. As Noel reports finishes, just come out of his map. He says Russia has increased attacks on the Mykolaiivka Vesely axis. So that is just up the north here. Let's get rid of that. Just up the northern area here. So on this northern area, they are putting a lot of pressure there. So really, it's a game of numbers, as I've said, in Bakhmut, and incremental gains. And Russia can just consistently make these incremental gains, and you can argue that it's a too high a cost for them, but they don't appear to be too bothered. The Wagner troops might have culminated, but you've got the VDV, the airborne troops, and other regular Russian units, as well as the DPR, active here, and they can take the baton and continue making these advances. It doesn't matter who it is from the Ukrainians' point of view, whether it's Wagner, whether it's convicts, whether it's regular troops. These are the enemy for them that are making gains into their territory, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for the Ukrainians. So that is what it looks like to the north of Bakhmut. Let's just give you the Russian side of things. So this is Rebar, west of Soledar, Wagner assault units liberated Blahadatne, which we have video evidence for. So that's not really debatable. Allowing them to put pressure on the Ukrainian grouping in Avdivka and Krasnohora. Control here makes it easier to attack Vasyukivka and the Rozdilivka, Vesely, and further north to Siviersk. I mean, there is no doubt that indeed, pressure around Krasnohora and Blahadatne, anywhere around here, will increase pressure elsewhere and allow them to continue. I mean, this is kind of a bit of a holdout area for the Ukrainians, as far as not one contiguous straight line. So this would be where the Russians would want to concentrate. They would really like to get to the west of the Bakhmutka River, going all the way up from this road, this grand line of communication that comes into Bakhmut from the north. So ideally, the Russians would want a nice sort of line down here at the very least, and then that will allow them to push on and further encircle Bakhmut. So as Rebar continues, near Avdivka, Russian fighters took over an enemy stronghold west of the Bakhmutka River. Ukrainian units tried recapturing lost positions, but their attack was repelled. Heavy positional fighting continues in Bakhmut, so we're going to go further into Bakhmut now. Wagner is trying to break defences in the city's south east, and then really that's where it ends as far as Bakhmut, and this kind of signifies that things have slowed down a little bit to the south. We haven't really heard anything over the last few days about the eastern suburbs of Bakhmut. It's like they've kind of stopped fighting, and I've talked about how that makes a lot of sense. It's going to be very costly to attack around there. You want to concentrate on encircling and moving through these sort of weaker villages and basically through the countryside, cut off the ground lines of communication and strangle Bakhmut and force an evacuation, as the Ukrainians did in Liman, for example. So that's kind of what we are seeing, concentrating on the north and south, but it has slowed down. The progress of Russian forces somewhat slowed, says no reports. Southeast of Ivaniska, Russian forces got repelled. No new information has reached him. And Defmon says the Ukraine's repulse attacks in the area of Ivaniska and Klishchivka. The area is still unclear to me, and I do not know if the Ukrainians have lost the high ground around Klishchivka. Most people seem to think that they have lost this high ground immediately to the northwest of Klishchivka, where they have entrenchments built. So I've moved my maps in that way, but it has slowed down over the last sort of 24, 48 hours as the Russians are attempting to move towards Ivaniska for that attempted encirclement. Rebar mentioned very little, and that's all you're going to get. Right, now we'll come on out of Bakhmut, and we're going to actually just move a little bit down south to Mayorsk, which is just south of Bakhmut. And we had this fight over the train station some weeks back. Well, Suryak Maps has changed their mapping to show that Ukrainians actually control some of the train line. Not that that's useful in and of itself, or as a railway line, but they have control over that. Because no one's going to be using that at the moment. But they have control just here that otherwise was under Russian control. This is indeed the only map that Suryak released yesterday. So corrections were made north of Mayorsk front, where the Ukrainian army is still in control over a sector of the railway. In addition, in the reports during the last days talking about new Russian advance in Avdivka front are not true. So this is Mayorsk, and that's that part of railway, and this section here they have corrected to say that this is actually in control of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have control of that. I don't know that it makes a huge difference to anything in particular, but and I don't know whether that is because the Ukrainians have done a counterattack around there and gained that land, or whether it's just a correction in the map and it was actually always that way. And they're saying that any attacks from Avdivka that are claiming of the Russians making some big advances are not true. So anyway, that's all literally the only mapping that Suryak has from yesterday. And we come on down to Avdivka to see what's happened around there. In this area, not a huge amount of detail. Defmon says Ukrainians repulse attacks in the area of Vodyanye, Marinka, Pobyeda, and Novomykhailivka. I made no changes in this area in weeks, so that's to just to let you know, south of Avdivka, and then as we come down south, Marinka, Pobyeda, which is to the south as they try and encirclement, they aren't getting past Pobyeda and Novomykhailivka there, so there are repulse attacks in those four places. Rebar says, pro-Russian source, Ukrainians continue shelling Donetsk cities. Donetsk itself, 11 buildings damaged in Petrovsky and Kirovsky districts. Petrovsky partly lost power. Avdivka, 4 homes were destroyed, and they will often concentrate on the fact that these are residential areas. These are homes, and they'll never admit really that they've hit key places, even though Petrovsky partly lost power. But of course, they're just just buildings or homes. Ilovaisk, 7 HIMARS launched at the train station. The depot rails and station were damaged. No injuries, and we've seen a little bit of evidence of that. And then Rebar talks about Russian fighters are attacking the dominating enemy strongholds by Severny and Toninka near Donetsk. Artillery and Soltsepek MLRS cover the attacking troops. So this is the claim that where are we? Where's my map? So if we go into Avdivka, if we look just north of Vodyanye, where the Russians have now got increased control, it's attacking towards Severny and Toninka. So this is the area that the Russians are hammering with artillery and MLRS, as according to them, and they are attacking. That is obviously their next port of call for that encirclement of Avdivka. They've got Vodyanye, it appears, mainly under their control. So yeah, I haven't really changed my map since I showed that they took the eastern part of Vodjany. They could well control all of Vodjany. Vodjany is again one of these long settlements like Pervomaisky. So how far into uh, into the very western areas of Vodjany they control, I'm not sure. So I'll just leave it like that for now. Anyway, as we come down south, as you've heard, no real changes in Marinka, Pobieda, Nova Mykolivka, repulse attacks again, and then we get to Vuhledar, where it seems to be the most active area along all the front lines, really. So Vuhledar, this is my map of Vuhledar, and we have remember, just to remind you, or any of you weren't aware, the Russians have been trying to, sort of two directions of attack, attacking from Pavlivka and attacking from Mykolaiv up here, trying to fix them in one place, and while doing that, attack them from another direction. However, it hasn't really worked, and the Ukrainians have managed to repel the Russians, to give the Russians not just a bloody nose, but a load of losses in terms of personnel and equipment. There are these what are called dachas here in the east and southeast of Vuhledar. Now, remember, Vuhledar is on high ground. Pavlivka and Mykolaiv are on lower ground, so there's a line of sight. The Ukrainian artillery is very active and competent around here, and they appear to be able to relatively easily hit Russian equipment because they're getting easy line of sight from Vuhledar, either from drones, but just from people who are able to see from these high-rise buildings. Vuhledar is, however, getting absolutely hammered by thermobaric weapons, by artillery. They are attempting to flatten it. This is what the map looks like in nice colours. This is Poulet-Volant's map. As you can see, they're attacking from two directions, or two locations, similar directions. What is fascinating here is that, considering how hotly contested Vuhledar is, Rebar says absolutely nothing about it, literally nothing. And yet there was activity, and a lot of activity there yesterday. All that tells you is it's going very badly for the Russians, because they don't mention it at all. No report says Russian forces were reportedly pushed back to the western Mikilska, a black square. Especially the Russian 155th Naval Brigade has big losses. In northern Pavlivka, Russian forces are in close combat with Ukrainian troops. There is no advance reported. Let's have a look. So there's Vuhledar, there's your high ground, there's the area that the Russians apparently had a foothold in a couple of days ago and have been pushed out of there. These are the dachas there. They've been pushed back to Mykolaiv and Pavlivka, and they're in fact apparently close fighting around there. So it could be that the Ukrainian forces on foot are around here as well. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that's what he says. So Defamon says the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Vuhledar. The 155th Naval Infantry Brigade once again got their asses kicked in the area. They managed to advance almost up to the road by Vuhledar, but got pushed back again to the southern dachas. So these are the southern dachas here, not these ones just up here, but it appears to this position there. And he has, Ukrainians having some element of control quite far away from Vuhledar, where the Russians were in control apparently a few days ago, around about up here. So quite a big change there. Tatrugami UA seems to have sources on the ground there. He says, to understand the scale of the assault, here is a list of concentrated forces near Vuhledar. The list is not full. Numbers of some units are omitted on purpose, but I will update as necessary. The 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, 40th Naval Infantry Brigade, and at least one brigade and separate units from the 29th Army, battalion-sized assault unit from the Cascade unit, smaller detachments from Donetsk forces, separate special forces groups from the GRU, and reserves from multiple units. So they have a lot of Russians have a lot of troops trying to win this one, but Tatrugami says high losses in assaulting units, squad, platoon, company, and not the brigade itself. So they still have enough meat to throw for a while. And it's not looking good for the Russians there. Indeed, I think the list is long, says someone, but doesn't it show their capabilities as earlier? But does it show their capabilities as earlier? They had losses of 70 to 80% in troops and armor. And Tatrugami replies, high losses in assaulting units, squads, platoon, and company. Oh, sorry. It goes on to say, Khodakovsky seems to be depressed lately. anticipating him to blame Russian generals who did things not like he wanted. Just wait for it. So Tatragami is anticipating this to cause some infighting within Russian forces. And in fact, last time the Russians attacked Pavlivka and beat their heads against a brick wall, there was a bit of a backlash to that, as the Ukrainians caused a lot of Russian losses in the area, and the Russians didn't seem to use any kind of sense in their attacks, didn't adapt to the situation, didn't change what they were doing, and a lot of Russian mill bloggers and other people within the establishment did push back about that. So the Ukrainian 72nd Brigade destroyed and damaged an IMR-2 combat engineering vehicle, 2 BMP-2 IFVs, 2 BMP-3 IFVs, and of the Russian army during an attempted attack in the vicinity of Vuhledar. So this is just one bit of video evidence. So when we had like reports yesterday or the day before of like 22 and 27 APCs taken out in a day, like a lot of these were happening around the Vuhledar area, and we've got video evidence and photographic evidence of a good deal of those that were claimed to have been lost. And wall monitors saying that the same sort of thing. They're continuing their assaults. They've been repelled. Fighting rages into the nights. Brigades are involved in the assault. So a lot of troops and mechanized stuff. Now, Arestovich, who's now the former kind of spokesperson for the Ukrainians, because he resigned, he made that claim about the air defense rocket being responsible for hitting the rocket that took out that apartment building in Dnipro previously. But anyway, what he still does his daily talk. Just he's not official and more translated. Dmitry translates them. There still are useful nuggets of information here. He talks about Vuhledar and says Russia hit Vuhledar 299 times with rockets, rocket launchers, and artillery in one day to support 34 attacks on the town. The Russian attacks were unsuccessful, and the Ukrainian defense holds. So that just shows that it is pretty heavy down there, but that the Russians are not succeeding. So they are losing a lot of troops and they are losing a lot of mechanized equipment. Again, it's not for the first time. Other than that, considering there was supposedly this big offensive from the Russians and 4 towns being taken by Orikhiv, we've heard nothing. There's been no reports for 48 hours plus of any activity around there. And in fact, Kherson as well, just artillery duels again in the area. As Arestovich says, Russian artillery hit the city of Kherson, including residential areas and indeed a hospital, as I've shown you. Ukrainian artillery responded by striking a Russian military position on the east bank of the Dnipro. Usual kind of stuff there. And talks about sort of S-300 attacks in Konstantinivka, which I showed you yesterday. Anyway, that's that for the Frontline update. Not a lot to mention in the Kherson Crimea area. There are hits. I showed you that a bridge by Melitopol was hit, and that's a railway bridge. That's the sort of thing that's going on behind the lines. HIMARS are still active. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. I really appreciate your continued support for the channel. It's hugely important to me. And the last thing to say is please check out the interview that Oris Zub had with me. He interviewed me for his channel. He's a Ukrainian. I interviewed him. We did a return. I really enjoyed speaking with him. Great little interview, if you don't mind me saying. So please check that out on Oris Zub's channel. Lots of people, a really insightful and thought-provoking video. Much appreciated. Thanks for the interview. Interesting historical approach. The interview was too short, though. You guys need to get back together again soon and keep talking. So, people really appreciating that. Go and check that out and give him some love, give him some support, and subscribe to his channel. Anyway, thank you. Take care. Speak to you later.